Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to 323 Weekly, and my camera isn't working, so we're gonna have to fix that. In the meantime, though, so apologies here. I appear to be having some camera difficulties. I'll figure that out. In the meantime, let's go ahead and hi, Flag. How you doing?
Oh, I'm good. I'm sorry about your camera.
Yeah, this is strange. Let me just see if I can refresh this here. NA production value, folks, at its finest. Was working a second ago. All right, there we go. We're back. So, somewhat of a surprising week of HGC in North America last week. So I think we're just going to go ahead and jump into the highlights. So starting out last week, first series that everyone thought was going to be the snoozer, I believe. You predicted a 3-0 and I predicted a 3-1, or vice versa, one of the two. So this was a snooze fest between Team Freedom and Tempo Storm. Not much to talk about there. And except we're 8 minutes into the game and Team Freedom is up by 2 levels. And Dansky with the perfect swap to pick off Cawthon Luck. And Team Freedom gets a keep and they aren't done yet. Team Freedom going to be pushing onto the core. And they absolutely just dominated this first game. 6 kills to 1. But they played the map absolutely perfectly. And Tempo Storm scrambling, not able to stop this core push. This was a surprising one. This was game 1. A lot of people expected pretty much a straight wipe. But instead, Team Freedom going to take this one over to a game 5. Have the lead 2-1 at one point, but Tempo Storm coming back, trying to get the lockdown on the Psalm, but Storm lands the perfect 3-man VP, and Psalm's VPs were good this last week, and we'll get back to that. Cawthon Luck with the Mighty Gust, while Nazmas is going to get away, the same cannot be said for Dansky, who gets blown up. Off this, Tempo Storm, going to get the pressure, going to get the core. And that was the first series of the day. Tempo Storm, while they win 3-2, not what many were expecting. Jumping over our second series of Friday night, we saw Superstars versus No Tomorrow. No Tomorrow had a disappointing week 1, trying to look for a way to win, and in fact, they do win a game, but right now, trying to posture up, they managed to get a keep from Superstars, but Sray, with that beautiful 5-man condemn, all the heroics are coming out, but just no one is dying. Supports played really good. Iacona Iacona did really, really well in this game. Tiger JK, actually, I thought had a great weekend, but Superstars gonna be able to get the kills here. Just fantastic play from Iacona, keeping everyone alive and sustaining through that. Superstars gonna take that series 3-1. So, bit of a surprising first set between Tempo Storm and Team Freedom. Like I said, I think between the two of us, we predicted Tempo Storm to win 3 games, and I think we both hit that one. But we expected, on average, Team Freedom to win 0.5 games. And they won exactly 4 times that amount. So, what happened?
I mean, it was a wonderful first game for Team Freedom. I mean, to not only show up and be able to take down Tempo Storm in game 1, but to do so on Battlefield of Eternity and in 9 minutes. They, like you said, they played that game just perfectly. They put pressure on Tempo Storm right out of the gate, and then they just did not rest. And so I don't know. I mean, I think that first game had a lot to do with the series itself. It was closer than. I still think it was closer than the 3-2 even shows. It was a pretty back and forth series.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's interesting to me because I don't know if it's Tempo Storm is just inconsistent. But I have to think, I mean, especially with the result we're going to talk about on Sunday in a bit, spoiler warnings, that Team Freedom figured something out this last weekend. Like, I think you had them at 8th in your power ranking. I had them at 7th. They were 8th in the overall power rankings. People were not impressed with their showing against Superstars. I think especially last weekend, we kind of leave with the thought that Superstars is still probably a mid-tier team. And I think, given that they lost to them 1-3, you're kind of scratching your head when they give the proposed top 2 teams in North America, or at least certainly heading into the season, the top 2 teams in North America, that they're coming out and beating those guys in games. And when they win pretty handedly in those 2 games that they beat Tempo Storm. And Tempo Storm has to fight. That was a set where at the end it came down to Winions actually had to win the map because Team Freedom was just keeping Tempo Storm away from the core. So I was very impressed with their play. I was very surprised. I don't know if the takeaway from this weekend is Team Freedom is actually pretty good. And forgive me, there's a mosquito in my house. There we go. I caught it. I actually just managed that. Well, okay. I don't know if the takeaway from the weekend is that Tempo Storm and Gale Force are in for some struggles, or if Team Freedom is making their push to get into the Western Clash. And I think anything between those extremes is also possible. So I don't know. We'll talk more, I guess, about Team Freedom in a bit. Jumping into our second series, certainly not as surprising, I would say. Superstars and No Tomorrow. We see Superstars coming up with the 3-1 victory. Nothing too surprising in that game. Superstars actually went fairly traditional meta. We did see the Cho'Gall ban from No Tomorrow on Brax's Holdout, which we got a taste of later in the weekend. But Superstars, when they seem to play kind of traditional meta, they actually seem to be pretty good at it. And I don't know why that changed later in the weekend, but I was very surprised that No Tomorrow still looked disorganized in this series to me. I think we saw great play from Casanova, who's been really strong for No Tomorrow. But overall, I'm still, the team synergy just doesn't seem to be there, and Superstars really controlled this series. They did lose the one game, but
they did. They lost the first game, but then after that, it was basically the rest of the series was all Superstars.
Yeah.
They had the momentum the entire time. Especially Sky Temple, I have a few notes here that they were dropping some amazing gusts. And so that team synergy was there where it simply just wasn't for No Tomorrow.
Saray played some great ETC on that Braxis Holdout too, so maybe next time let him take the Cho'Gall, I guess. To that end, we're going to go ahead and jump in to Saturday games now. So heading that direction, our first series, Tempo Storm steps back up to the plate. This time they're taking on B-Step. Now B-Step struggled in the first weekend, but right now B-Step trying to make something happen. McIntyre a little bit slow. K1 Pro looked for the flank, but once again Psalm with the great Void Prism. 3-man trap. K1 Pro gets absolutely annihilated. I really love June's positioning there with the ice block. And they managed to get the 2-for-1 trade, and they aren't done yet as the chase is on. King Caffeine trying to make something happen with the Mosh, but it's just not going to go. APM getting run down by Falstad. Perfect Twilight Dream. Smart move by June to not blow it earlier in a panic. Got maximum value there with 3. And that's a 5-man wipe. Tempo Storm all over B-Step. 3-0. B-Step in for a lot of struggles. Heading over to our second series of Saturdays was Team Naventic versus No Tomorrow. And early on, it's all No Tomorrow 2-0. And Casanova barely going to escape here on map 3 on Dragonshire, the pivotal map. But he ain't done yet. Jason going to come up and pick off Zuna. And look at this cheeky AF play. Casanova polishing off Tomster. That said, Naventic going to win that map, trying to make the comeback happen. They go from 0-2 to 2-2 as we head into Game 5. Sky Temple, B-Kid, gonna show the power of Varian, getting in, the Dragon Fang with the follow-up from Big Impact, gonna take down Tychus with the taunt and the Force Wall. But Naventic isn't done yet. B-Kid says, "Hey, Talking Trees, let me introduce you to my friend Warbringer." And Casanova stays in that tower a little bit too long. He's going to get picked off, and he's going to get Tiger JK picked off in the meantime. Naventic comes all the way back from down 2-0 to win the series 3-2 over No Tomorrow. So, something of another surprising series I thought was just No Tomorrow playing as well as they did after struggling with superstars. Mm-hmm. I still think there's promise to that team. I talked about this last week, where heading into the season, they were consistently just outside that top four, back when we thought the top four was very clearly the four teams of Tempo Storm, Gale Force, Naventic, and B-Step. We seem to be a little bit wrong on that at this point in the season. But Naventic, I don't know. They when they had to, they won. And certainly last weekend we talked about how an 0-2 against Temple Storm and Gale Force isn't something to necessarily panic about. Mm-hmm. But I'm just kind of concerned that ultimately, and my mic seems to be a bit problematic, so I'll be fixing that while I'm talking. Ultimately, I'm concerned that Naventic is not that good. I guess is the inarticulate way to put it. I'm sure there's better ways to word that, but when we're looking at how they've played, I mean, they looked really bad against Tempo Storm until Tempo Storm started doing some silly things. Mm-hmm. And they looked really bad against No Tomorrow until No Tomorrow kind of collapsed. And they looked awful against Gale Force. So I'm still worried that Naventic, that there's something not good there. And I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about that later when we talk about B-Step. But B-Step, first weekend gets 0-2'd, dropping to Gale Force and a Team 8, and now they're getting 3-0'd here. This was their first series where they went winless. They at least got a game off of Team 8. They got 2 games off of Gale Force, but it was 3-0, and the Tomb of the Spider Queen game, which was game 1, was very close. It was level 25. It was a 30-minute game. Could have gone either way. They managed to win team fights in that game, but not get anything off of it. After that, they weren't close games.
No. That first game, too, was just ridiculous in how slow it was. Mm-hmm. I mean, that 30 minutes really drug on there. There were so many gaps of time where just nothing really happened. Nobody could turn anything in. Nobody was getting any kills, and it was just kind of circling and dancing around one another.
I hear Twitch had to start rationing the Resident Sleeper emote.
Yeah, I mean, but aside from that, B-Step definitely looked like just everything was not firing together. Everything, like their combos weren't landing. Mm-hmm. The timing was just off on all of those combos. Yeah, I mean, first game, sure, but B-Step was not looking very good the rest of that series.
Yeah, and it's troubling to see, I would say, because that is a team that has the pedigree. They have 3 former members of Cloud9 on their team. They have McIntyre, who's been in the scene a while. APM, who, has not really been particularly criticism worthy. I really don't think he's been the problem. And I think, if anything, he's probably been the strong part of the team, if there has been one, although that's just my opinion. But I don't know. We're definitely talking about B-Step in our topics portion. But there is something amiss. With that, we're going to jump into our Sunday games. And this one was perhaps the biggest shocker of the weekend. Gale Force going against Team Freedom. I had Gale Force up 3-0. You had, forgive the sound there, You had Gale Force winning 3-1, and Fan in map 1 or map 3, Battlefield of Eternity, Gale Force did drop a game, but Fam just doing Fan things, gonna go in, get 3 kills. Gale Force dominated this map, and then weird things started to happen. Team Freedom dominates on Warhead Junction before heading to the final game on Infernal Shrines. And Team Freedom, even though it's a 5v5, pushes in for the core here. They're looking to end the game. Fantastic zoning there by Zugrug. Zugrug going in, pushing Gale Force farther and farther away, and then says, hey guys, guess what? Leyline seals off. It's time to go core. And in comes John Cena onto Crowan, and he's going to get some core damage. Team Freedom just diving onto the core. Gale Force doing everything they can to get the kills. Dansky is going to go down, but it's not enough as Team Freedom just races core. Huge upset. Team Freedom wins 3-2. Last game of the series, Superstars Team 8. A lot of people really big on Team 8 after last weekend. This was the only chance we got to see him. And the Cho'Gall coming out on map 3 on Brax's holdout. But the chase is on as we're seeing Leoric getting a great entomb on the Cho'Gall, followed up with the Twilight Dream. Gonna see Vala get picked off by a great tongue from Glaurung, and the Horrify is gonna secure the double kill on Srey and Hosty on that Cho'Gall. Team 8 dominates en route to a 3-0 win. So, there was one series that I think we were surprised how lopsided it was. And there was another series that we were very surprised how lopsided it wasn't. And not just how lopsided it wasn't, but just to see the upset. The only thing to ask is, how did Gale Force lose?
And I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but I think their drafting definitely did not help matters.
Mm-hmm.
I think them picking up Lost Vikings on Game 4 was a mistake. That and Team Freedom just knew exactly how to push against Lost Vikings.
Right.
But to be perfectly honest, I think Gale Force lost because of their flexibility.
I agree. I think we'll save to talk about it in our topic session, but
sure.
This was heading into the weekend. I put up the power rankings, and then I posted all the games, and I said, here are the games, and here's their seeding based on the current power ranking. Gale Force was number 1, Team Freedom was number 8, according to the poll last week. 200 respondents, so it wasn't like it was just, a handful of my bald friends and I sitting around talking about how much we don't like Team Freedom. This was a consensus opinion. Gale Force is the best. They had over half of the number 1% votes. Team Freedom was the worst. They were the lowest ranked team, and it wasn't particularly close between them and No Tomorrow, even though I actually had No Tomorrow in that 8th spot. Mm-hmm. So this was Appalachian State beating Michigan insofar as HGC Hot goes, I think, in terms of perception. Now, what I take away from that is the top of North American Hots and the bottom in HGC maybe isn't as far away as we think they are. But I have to question how seriously Gale Force took preparation there, because I don't think with their drafting they looked particularly prepared. And we'll definitely talk about that in a second. But that was the week. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pull up here in just a second the standings from the week. So we're going to see Team 8 still at the top of the standings. So Team 8, 9-1 map record. Only dropped a single map to B-Step. They have 3-0'd Superstars, and they 3-0'd No Tomorrow. Now, they have not played anyone else in the top 3. So they haven't played Tempest Storm, they haven't played Gale Force. But they did beat Superstars pretty handedly. At this point, Team 8, very strong hold on first. Only team with 2 3-0 victories. Gale Force dropping down to that 3rd position after the loss. But we're starting to see some degree of striation here. So we have 2 3-0 teams, 2 2-1 teams, 2 1-2 teams, and 2 0-3 teams. I guess still, to me, the most surprising, given what I expected coming into the season, B-Step at 0-3 still is the most surprising to me. Though No Tomorrow at 0-3 also surprises me somewhat as well. If you asked me 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't say that. But we are definitely starting to see kind of that separation. And especially after this week, I think it's only going to get bigger when we're talking about, we're going to be seeing mid-tier teams playing each other. We're definitely going to see top-tier teams play each other. Mm-hmm. And then B-Step, this is their chance where they have to start winning just to not be looking at potential Crucible situation. Because if the Crucible were today, it would be B-Step and No Tomorrow. And that's, I think, surprising, certainly to people who haven't watched the last 2 weeks, but I just don't think B-Step's played that well. They've also had a tough schedule, and I don't pretend that they haven't. They've played the top 3 teams right now in NA. Those are the teams they've played, but they still have not looked good in defeat, in my opinion. Jumping ahead to then the Western Clash, what the standings mean for the Western Clash. So again, the top 3 teams after Phase 1, so we are now a little bit more than 40% of the way. We've played 12 of the 27 games that will be played, so 4 out of 9, But, so about 44% of the way there. But right now, Team 8 in that number 1 spot, right behind Tempo Storm, both undefeated. Obviously, both of them can't be undefeated after next weekend. Gale Force still hanging in there, despite the loss of Team Freedom, but, going to want to make sure to stop that trend of losing maps. We'll see where it goes. Jumping into then the Power Rankings poll. So this was put out on Reddit following Sunday night's games and into Monday morning. Didn't get as many responses this week. I think the post got kind of buried a bit. But we did get about 70 responses. The people have spoken. Tempo Storm still number 1, even though Team 8 got the most number 1 votes. A lot of people, I think, who don't have Team 8 at number 1, still a little bit skeptical. Gale Force dropping 2 spots. Here's the funny thing to me, and this is funny. Gale Force is right above Team Freedom, who beat them. Team Freedom right above Superstars, who beat them. Good job, Internet. Good job. No Tomorrow drops to that bottom spot. B-Step and Naventic still falling down. Even though Naventic managed to get the win, still dropping 2 slots. People are starting to get concerned. Mm-hmm. So now I guess that takes us into kind of our discussion this week. So I guess the first place to start is B-Step and Naventic are still struggling. These were teams that were expected to be in the top 4. Naventic, granted, again, had to play the toughest 2 teams, at least on paper, what we expected in Week 1, in Tempo Storm and in Gale Force. So going 0-2 there, not catastrophic. I think they have to be more concerned about having to come back from down 2-0 against No Tomorrow than they do about losing Gale Force, because No Tomorrow is not supposed to be one of those top echelon teams we've been talking about. And while we're kind of discussing this, I'm going to go ahead and put up our individual power rankings. So, broad agreement, just again, a couple switches. I think the biggest difference is that you have Superstars a lot farther down than I do. And I kind of more or less agree with you that between 4 and 6, it really could go in any order at this point, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. And especially coming from last week where I had Superstars pretty high up there.
I think you had them at 4 or 3 or 4. I can't remember.
I think I had them at 4. But I just was not seeing a lot of strength coming from their team this weekend. In terms of putting Team Freedom 4th, they really surprised me.
I kind of played with that idea. Part of why I didn't was just because Superstars did beat Team Freedom, so it's hard for me to put... I couldn't put Superstars down at 6, because I really was set on my bottom 3 of No Tomorrow at the bottom, B-Step just barely above them, and Naventic being just above them. And so from there, it's like... And I was set on my top 3, so I had to just put Superstars and Team Freedom somewhere. But I guess that really takes us to Naventic. Both of us have them in the bottom 4. And we didn't last week. Both of us had him, Naventic, at number 4 last week. And in fact, so did the poll. Yet, despite winning, they drop. And I guess the question is, what does Naventic need to do to start looking impressive again? I mean, obviously, they need to win games. Mm-hmm. That's a big one. And going 2-3, or winning 3-2 over No Tomorrow, who we're both kind of very hesitant to think is a good team right now, is not what we really expected heading into this season.
No, definitely not. I really don't know what they need to do. And this is probably just coming from my personal, Heroes of the Storm experience, where I am not a competitive player. I am not a pro player by any means. But they were falling to those Casanova swaps pretty often within that series. I saw some weird things, just like in week 1, where Zuna drops and Kenma decides to go all out, just going and attacking for seemingly no reason. And I saw that happen yet again.
Yeah, definitely in the first 2 games, there was a lot of, very aggressive posturing by Zuna and Kenma, which got punished by the Artanis. I think in the later games, when they got patient and let B-Kid do his thing, I was actually impressed. I was really underwhelmed with B-Kid in week 1, and consequently, I was actually very impressed with his play, even through all 5 games. I don't think you can put the 2 losses on him, and certainly in that Sky Temple game, I mean, he initiated all the fights that they won.
Yeah.
So I thought B-Kid really starting to fit in, but the question is, when are they going to start consistently developing that patience that just allows the fight to develop? Because I think if they let the fight develop, they have the better micro skills than almost any other team in North America. I really, when we talk about Naventic heading into this year, what do we talk about? They're the best team fighting team in North America. Tempo Storm is almost as good at team fighting, but better at macro. Gale Force, weaker team fighting than Tempo Storm, but they're just all about macro and chaos. So, these were what we were talking about with the 3 teams. We've seen good team fighting from Tempo Storm. We've seen good team fighting from Gale Force. Bad drafting, but good team fighting. We only see it sometimes with Naventic, and it seems to be not even on a game-to-game basis, but a fight-to-fight basis, where sometimes they're like, oh, this fight they're just throwing for reasons. I don't know. I mean, do you think I'm judging too harshly there, or?
No, I don't think you are. I think you have a really good point in terms of letting B-Kid initiate, and he was playing a strong Varian, especially in those last 2 games. But yeah, I think the aggressive positioning definitely punished them, and so either they need to pull that back, or either they, keep dropping in the ranks, keep dropping matches, and they'll have to realize, or they'll have to face a Crucible.
Yeah, I'm still not worried about them facing Crucible, just on the basis that, they've already gone, in terms of who they have left to play, that I think is likely to beat them. I think it's Team 8. Everyone else, I think they can and should win those series, but they're going to have to play consistently against Superstars. Because Superstars has, for their faults, for their weird play, they do have really good shot calling, and so Superstars is, in my opinion, definitely going to out-macro Naventic, so they're just going to have to be patient and wait for their advantageous fight when they play. Which we'll get into.
Sure.
Second... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and to clarify, I don't think they're in any danger for facing the Crucible either. But I think in terms of what it's gonna take to get them to learn from their mistakes, is either if they have to drop that far down. Otherwise, I'm foreseeing them kind of just stuck in that mid-tier 4th, 5th, or 6th place, and they're not going to be able to get above that.
Yeah. So I guess this takes us then to B-Step. So with B-Step, we're talking about a team that is really not where we expected them. They're at 3-9, so 25% win percentage, and they've lost fewer games in each series. Or they've won fewer games in each series. So they win 2 games against Gale Force in Series 1, and we think, okay, we expect that. Gale Force and B-Step, they're both in that top 4 group. There's parity among the top 4. This is fine. Mm-hmm. They go against Team 8, and they just get outplayed. We think, okay, well, Team 8's hot up and coming. B-Step probably still working out some of the kinks. McIntyre's still new to the roster. Okay. They go against Tempo Storm. And while I think we expected them to lose, they were really only competitive in that Tomb of the Spider Queen game, and I think that B-Step overall has really struggled in that series. And it's the same things. I think the consistent element in all their losses is I don't think they know how to win a late-game team fight. Because they get to the late game, except for one of the games against Tempo Storm. They get to the late game, and they even get an engagement that they maybe want. You know, when I showed the highlight, they get a lockdown on Psalm, on Zeratul, and they still lose the fight, and they get wiped. What is the solution there? Because they're just not closing out games. Gillyweed was talking about it on the cast of Tempo Storm, or I'm sorry, B-Step. If they win the early game, they throw in the late game. And if they lose the early game, they come back and play strong in the late game, but they can't overcome that deficit, and ultimately they lose one team fight and lose the game off it because they lost so much in the early game. I don't know what the solution is there. I think that, you know, the McIntyre has not impressed me. iDream has made some good plays here and there. When he's made good plays, they've been great plays, but his consistency, I think, has been poor. K1 Pro, it just doesn't look the same as he did last year. You know, with Denial last year, they were consistently second place in North America, and he and King Caffeine were playing great, and I'm just not seeing that this season. And I don't know if the rest of NA has just gotten better around them, or if it's a matter of there really is some lack of synergy there that needs to be rectified.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think that you're probably closer than what I would be able to predict, but I don't know. They're just, that synergy was not connecting, and you're right, they could not really get those team fights. In that first game with Tempo Storm and Tomb of the Spider Queen, I'm sure that everybody who watched that game will permanently have that pump, Zarya grenade sound stuck in our brain, because that's what Tempo Storm was able to do, was just push them away, just whittle them down. Right. And they just couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't charge in. They couldn't sustain it, really. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if something's just kind of not clicking in terms of their teamwork or what. They're still sponsorless, right? Yeah,
they're still sponsorless for the time being. I haven't actually heard any news there. I mean, we talked about last week how Team 8 looks like they have a team house, but the details of that haven't really matriculated out. B-Step still, to my knowledge, sponsorless. They certainly don't have a sponsor in their name, so I don't know. They certainly have not played in a way that, if sponsorships are at a premium, and right now in North America they are, there are 4 sponsored teams: Tempo Storm, Team Freedom, Gale Force, and Naventic. B-Step Superstars, No Tomorrow, and Team 8 still unsponsored officially. So I don't know. I think B-Step, they have played 3 tough opponents. The 3 teams on top of the rankings right now. The Gale Force win, though, or the Gale Force loss, that 3-2 loss to Gale Force, has lost a lot of its shimmer with Gale Force tripping over Team Freedom.
Yeah.
And the fact that they weren't really particularly competitive in either the Tempo Storm or Team 8 series leads me to believe that, they can only go up from here. They're not going to play as hard of teams. Mm-hmm. But if they're going to go up, they really have to start this weekend. The Western Clash is basically already off the table. They have 3 losses. Mathematically, you can get in at 4-3. But when you consider the teams they've lost to are all in the top 3, they're going to need one of those games to drop to 3, like one of those teams to drop to 3-4 to get in, and then all kinds of mathematical craziness has to happen. So the Western Clash is basically gone. Mm-hmm. At this point, it's a matter of gearing up and getting things right heading into Phase 2. So we'll see if they can do that. Team 8, though. That Team 8. Still at the top of the NA rankings. And still looking impressive. They got a hell of a weekend ahead of them, but Team 8 dominating their series against Superstars. We definitely saw kind of all that they could do in that series. We'll definitely get to see more of them this weekend. Only seeing one game on Sunday night. It's somewhat easy to forget how surprising it was week 1 when they just looked so dominant in this series. Do they stay on top after this weekend? They have a tall order.
I think so. It is definitely a tall
order
going up against Tempo Storm and Gale Force.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking off the top of my head, I don't know, or I don't really remember what my predictions are, and if they are going to match this. But Team 8 was just looking great. I had predicted this series in favor of Superstars. It was a 3-2, but going 3-0 for Team 8, they just really looked kind of unstoppable against Superstars.
I think the thing that Team 8 has done that no other team has really matched, in my view, is every other team at some point has done a draft where I said, that seems like a bad idea, and then they lose. And Team 8, once or twice, specifically putting Glaurung on Medivh in the first game, Infernal Shrines, I looked at him like, that looks like a bad idea. What does Glaurung do? He amazes on Glaurung, and he wins Player of the Week. And so they're the only team that, in my opinion, because you have the meta figured out when people look at a draft and say, I don't know what they're doing there, and at the end of the game you're like, okay, I know what they were doing there. When Gale Force went Lost Vikings, Ragnaros, Morales, Gul'dan, and ETC, all of us are like, I don't know what they're doing there. And then at the end of the game we're saying, yeah, I still don't know what they were thinking there. That hasn't happened with Team 8. Even in the one game they've lost, you're like, okay, yeah, I see how they lost that game, but they definitely didn't lose it in draft. And so I do think they have the meta figured out in a way that other teams don't. And I'm not sure why other teams haven't necessarily caught on. It seems like other teams get Ragnaros just when they can, and they don't seem to use him well. Like, Team 8's the only team that when they've used Ragnaros Team Freedom, I take it back. Team Freedom used Ragnaros brilliantly against Tempo Storm. But Team 8 seems to be the only one who's used it consistently well, in my opinion.
Yeah. And, Team 8 used Ragnaros, looks like 6 out of their 7 games first weekend.
Yep.
Lost once.
Yeah, exactly. And other teams have lost. Gale Force broke out Ragnaros twice. They lost both games. And now you can question the supporting comp around Ragnaros at that point. But if part of knowing how to use a hero is knowing how to draft to support that hero. Naventic broke out Ragnaros twice against Gale Force, lost both games. So they seem to have that kind of key on, okay, here's what we're using Ragnaros for. Like Cursed Hollow, they break him out, and what they do, they just draft a comp to stall out the first point, let Ragnaros double soak, and, they don't even try to get the first point. against No Tomorrow, they were able to get it anyway, but they just try to stall it out all day and night and, get a 1-2 level lead heading into level 10.
Yeah.
Why hasn't other teams adopted that on Cursed Hollow?
Tempo Storm did.
Tempo Storm did. That is true. Tempo Storm did. But I guess that, when I see Team 8 on Cursed Hollow, I'm like, okay, here's what they're going to do. And they do it. And it doesn't seem to be particularly widely spread to see kind of the stall tactics. Mm-hmm. And it seems that stall tactics are particularly powerful in this meta. Because with the way the game seems to be set up, especially with Ragnaros in it, the late game it used to be that, if you just focused on late game, you would lose so much in the early game that all it would take is one pick off and you'd lose. And B-Step still falls into that, and a couple teams still fall into that. With Ragnaros, it seems to kind of change the formula. If you're able to win the early game, you can just stay ahead. Because of the combo potential of Sulphurous Smash, you can basically just pick off a squishy if you aim it well. So I think Team 8 using that has been particularly powerful. And Team 8's drafts have just been consistently strong, in my opinion.
Yeah. The one big thing that really kind of stuck out to me with Team 8 playing Superstars was one of the plays that I included in the highlight reel, just at number 4, and it was just there wasn't even a single kill, but Team 8 being able to just expertly dodge 2 straight heroics. They clearly know when Ragnaros is going to throw Sulphurous Smash. They know where it's going to happen. They know when, and then they're able to just kind of negate it. So if they aren't using Ragnaros, they definitely know how to play against it.
Yeah. Well, I will say this, though. Team 8, I think, can go as far as Glaurung can carry them. And I want to read off these. So, Team 8 has won 6 straight maps. They've won 3 straight series, but they've won 6 straight maps. Going back to their last loss was against B-Step in Game 1. Hero of the Heroes Glaurung has played in those 6 games, in order from most recent to least recent. Dahaka, Medivh, Tracer, Li Ming, Vala, Artanis. I don't think anyone else has played that group of heroes. I think Gale Force has tried. It didn't work to play diversity to that extent. But his hero pool has just been nothing like what it used to be. I mean, it was, Zeratul, Illidan, and Chen for a long time. Mm-hmm. And now it's just like, oh yeah, I'll play that hero and dominate with it. That's just what I do. I'm Glaurung. So I really think Team 8 is going to just continue to do well, so long as Glaurung just continues to make those plays. So jumping now to Team Freedom. So this is a team we both had near the bottom last week. We were not impressed with them against Superstars. But they looked like a very, very different team. Collusion especially, he played perfect in my opinion. As well as Akaface played in week 1 against Naventic, Collusion seemed to play at that level in all 10 games they played this weekend. And let's not forget, they played 10 games this weekend. They took Gale Force and Tempo Storm both to a Game 5, and they beat Gale Force. Mm-hmm. So, is this a sign that Team Freedom fixed something or figured something out last week? And is this something you think they can maintain?
Yes, I think so.
To both questions, I assume?
Yeah. I mean, I think that they were close they were close in beating Tempo Storm. Most of those games that they did lose against Tempo Storm, it was fairly even throughout, where the lead kept going back and forth. And so I do think that Team Freedom had something click after that first weekend. Either that, or we just didn't see we didn't see enough of them the first weekend with just the one match. But they were looking really good, I think.
Yeah. I was surprised by their performance, only because the reason I was very low on them was I still thought Superstars was a middle of the pack team, and the first 2 games in their series with Superstars, I mean, they just got flat outplayed at every level of the game. And they managed to bring it back in Game 3, but I just attribute, Superstars had a bad draft that game. You know, they came back, they won Game 4, although it was close and it required a pretty clutch Taz Dingo core rush. Mm-hmm. But this weekend, they looked like they were... It wasn't like... Gale Force did play bad, and I don't want to sit there and say, like, that's the only reason Team Freedom caught up. But Gale Force, I think we both agree, did do weird things that we're not really sure what happened, and that's kind of our next topic. But at the same time, like, Tempo Storm pretty much did what Tempo Storm does, and they still stayed with them. So I think Team Freedom is still, in a middle-of-the-pack team. But when I start talking about teams that are likely Crucible-bound, I don't put them in there right now. I definitely put B-Step in there. I definitely put No Tomorrow in there. I'm concerned about Naventic and Superstars, their ability to play. I think Naventic has the potential to be Crucible-bound if they don't start playing better. I think Superstars, we just haven't seen them play well against what I would consider a very good team yet. And so if they get upset by one of the, B-Step or No Tomorrow, that puts them in a bad spot because they still have to play Gale Force, they still have to play Tempo Storm, they still have to play Naventic, potentially, so that could be interesting. I don't put Team Freedom in there. I think Team Freedom is, at least for now, safely in that top 5. I was really impressed with Collusion. And that speaks a lot to me because, heading into this season, who are the big names on Team Freedom? You have Collusion, who was on Gust or Bust and has always been a solid player. Didn't play support. He's playing support now. And you have Zugrug, who was last at a LAN on the team Rack Attack. So this was the, I believe, spring season of 2016. But not a particularly well-known name. You have Insomniac, who's known as a streamer. You have, Nazmas, who's, been a Hero League guy. But these guys were like, oh, we all are really good at Hero League. Let's make a team. I mean, that's how the team formed. And so I'm surprised to see them doing well, given they don't have that pedigree. But I think, if they can maintain that, I think the sky is the limit for them.
Sure. I agree.
All right, so I guess this takes us to the last draft. I'm going to read a comp to you, and I want you to tell me how we win the map. Ready? All right. Okay. So we're going to have a Lost Vikings comp, right? All right, so we're going to soak 3 lanes. We're going to look for pickoffs. Mm-hmm. Going to try to outplay the map while just maintaining XP. Always try to look for the gank attempt. Don't take a 4v5 fight. So to do this, we're going to get ETC. All right, good engagement, good stun potential. Ragnaros. Gul'dan. But it's okay, we'll have a nice aggressive support. Morales. I at one point during that cast, Dreadnought said, okay, I think I see what they're trying to go for here. Mm-hmm. And I still have no clue what they were trying to go for there.
Was it Gul'dan or was it Zul'jin?
Oh no, it was Zul'jin. Sorry, not Gul'dan. You're correct. But Zul'jin, still kind of a sustained damage unless he's low on health.
Yeah. And,
when I think of healers that support DPS who are low on health, I tend to not think Morales. Mm-hmm. Remind me, did they go medevac that game? I think they ended up going combat stim. I could be wrong there. Let me see if I can pull that up.
Yeah, I honestly can't remember.
Let me see if I can figure out what heroic they went there. But like if they went medevac, I could understand them going like gank attempt somewhat, but it's still weird. Like, where's the burst damage there? That one I still don't entirely understand. Mike Udall was not the best on Vikings in that game, in my opinion.
No, and we've seen him play some strong Vikings.
Yeah, in the qualifiers on Cursed Hollow, his Vikings were incredible.
Yeah. Just on this one, he was getting caught out constantly.
Well, I think it also didn't help that I mean, you know how many times Team Freedom died in that map, right?
No, I don't.
It was 0.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. So when I talked about how I don't see the kill potential, at the end of the game, neither did anyone else, including Gale Force. So, and this kind of takes me to what they did this weekend that I don't get. The previous game, or no, not previous game, but in game 2, we see a comp, we see Dahaka, we see Zeratul, we see Li Ming, we see Brightwing, and we see Muradin. Now, last week, if we saw this comp, and we saw a similar comp on Towers of Doom, you'd say, okay, Crowan on Muradin, Equinox on Dahaka, probably Mike Udall or Fan on Zeratul, Mike Udall and Li Ming, because he's been playing some mages lately, but you could swap the two and you wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Instead, we see Mike Udall on Muradin, and we see Crowan taking up the Li Ming, which, it's what he was known for, but we haven't really seen him play it in a while.
Yeah.
And I just... yeah, and I mean, I love Mike Udall. I do think he's a good player, and so I don't mean for this to be a jab at him, but isn't he, like, at most, like, the third best Muradin on that team? I mean, when you look at who else has played Muradin on that team, they have Equinox, who they brought in supposedly to be a tank. And the idea was he would pick up more niche heroes when needed. So you'd see the Kerrigan Tracer, but otherwise you see him on tank. And he was on Dahaka in that game, to be fair. But to see him on... To see Michael Udall on Muradin instead of Crowan, when Crowan had been playing it pretty well, I think was a bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah.
And then you go into the game on Warhead Junction, and Equinox is playing Ragnaros. And I have to think that, shouldn't that be a hero that either Fan or Mike Udall, who are kind of filling that melee role more often, shouldn't that be a hero they're working on? And shouldn't that be a hero they're comfortable with? And maybe Mike Udall is strong on Ragnaros, but they just needed a Vikings player that map.
Yeah.
But I have to think and this goes to what you suggested earlier, I think they're flexing too much. They're doing a lot of quantity, but their quality this last weekend really was lacking, it seemed.
Yeah, and that was the big question, was, for how long can they keep this up? Sure, they can play so many different roles, and they can play so many different heroes, but when it comes down to it, they just don't have as many games under their belt with those heroes. And so, yeah, for the first 2 games, we saw Muradin with Gale Force, but neither one of those was Crowan on Muradin. It was, I think, Equinox first,
and then Mike Udall. Yeah.
And I wasn't impressed with either of their Muradin play.
And in fairness, game 1 I was actually fairly impressed with Equinox's play, but that's just because game 1 really was dominant. Like, game 1, I'm watching the game Sunday night, and I think, okay, I can look away from the screen, because Gale Force is just going to train wreck Team Freedom. This is what we expected. Everything going to plan. And then Cursed Hollow was like, okay, Gale Force played a little bit weird there. Comp seemed a little bit too focused on burst damage. Not enough potential to get someone low, but they'll bring it back. And they did in Game 3. Game 3, they dominated again. And then just Game 4 and 5, the comps didn't really make sense to me.
Yeah.
We already talked about Game 4 Warhead Junction. Game 5 was on Infernal Shrines, and they go Ragnaros. Okay, I get that. This time it's Fan on Ragnaros instead of Equinox. So, okay, why didn't Fan play Ragnaros the last game? We put Crowan on the range Zul'jin, but I don't know their hero pools, but just it seems to me that they're flexing almost for the sake of flexing, and then they break out solo tank Zarya with a Medivh on that map. And normally when you see Medivh, you're seeing like a hard engage tank, like a really hard engage, get in there and get something, and the reason Medivh is there, put the protect on the tank to prolong the fight, and if it's going bad, give the portal for the tank to get out. That's how Glaurung played it on Infernal Shrines, and it looked brilliant. He got Diablo out of trouble. We've seen Medivh, especially in Europe, used for like the backline ETC dive, where they go in through the portal and just blow up on the back line. But you need a tank with stuns to do that.
Yeah.
Zarya doesn't do that.
Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely think that the drafting was very, very odd, and going single tank Zarya here was not worth it.
Yeah, they managed to pull it off against B-Step in one of their games. They had the solo tank Zarya, I believe it was game 4, when I remember, like, when they drafted it, my thought was, why are they drafting this? They're down 2-1, they just threw the series. And they actually made it work. So, but that game was on Towers of Doom, so that's a map with, a lot of potential for pickoffs, certainly, with the split you get around the shrines. They also had double global on that map. They also had a Tassadar and a Vala. So with that, you have the Force Wall, you have the Rain of Vengeance, which I believe is what they took. You have the Falstad Gust to set them up in the corner. So you have enough tools to zone them to put them in the corner where you want them. You can get them with the Gust, you can get them with the Force Wall, you can get them with the Repulsion Zone, you can get them with the Rain of Vengeance. There, they just didn't have it. I mean, the Gul'dan Horrify has some counter synergy, of course, with Repulsion Zone. Although it has some synergy if you can separate them in a narrow alley. But I still just don't get that draft. I think against Naventic, other than that Battlefield of Eternity game, well, no, even Battlefield of Eternity, they drafted somewhat of a non-standard comp with the Tracer Vala, but we got it. Like, that was a very aggressive dive the backline, get kills comp, and what did they do? They got aggressive, they dived the backline, they got kills.
Sure.
Their Towers of Doom draft against Naventic. They have triple global, and they have lockdown with Muradin. What do? They get lockdown with Muradin, 3 globals come in, and people die. Like, I get that. That purpose, that focus of, I look at the comp, here's what they're going to do, and then they do it, just wasn't there last weekend. Even in the games they won to some extent, other than Battlefield of Eternity. With Battlefield of Eternity, we're like, okay, they're going to hard engage and let Illidan go ham, and they did that. But otherwise, they just look, I don't want to say unfocused, but they look confused about what they wanted to do, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, they just kind of looked a little all over the place. I do think that, like what you said, I think that they were flexing for flex's sake, and I just didn't pan out. That or Team Freedom did their homework, and they knew how to counter it.
Yeah. And I was really... But, I mean, like, right now I have on the screen the final core push from Team Freedom. Notice that Gale Force just keeps getting pushed back, and they get pushed back, and they get pushed back, and then all of a sudden Team Freedom's like, oh hey, we're closer to the core than Gale Force is. Want to get on it, guys? And they're like, oh yeah, sure, let's do that. And I get that they're trying to bait the Punisher away, but they had, exactly what I said. They had no ability to force an engagement. They really didn't have a chance to get aggressive. They had a ton of poke, but that was it. Like, they didn't even have, something like a Void Prison to try to set up the Wombo combos, which we saw in some earlier games when they would break out the Zera tools. So, I think overall, I'm not at all panicked about Gale Force. I just think they need to not be cocky, and I think they probably were a bit cocky that series.
Yeah, it's very possible, especially coming off of a very strong opening weekend and beating their what they call rivals for Naventic 3-0.
Right, and they looked. I mean, they were convincingly number one in the poll. It wasn't just that they beat Naventic; they beat Naventic in such a way that we thought, wow, this team might actually contest the European teams. That team that showed up last Sunday would get destroyed by Misfits, Dignitas, Fnatic, maybe even Team Expert.
Yeah.
And by destroyed, I mean 3-0 would lose. And I think they have better potential than that, but they have to consistently show it. So with that, that's kind of talk time. Let's go ahead and jump into happier thoughts with superlatives. Best series of the week. I'm going to go into Team Freedom and Tempo Storm as my best series of the week. The reason is that started off the week, and it set the tone for what Team Freedom was going to do that weekend, but it also had, and I'm going to go to it with my play of the week, the best ending on Towers of Doom ever. That game was insane. The way it ended was crazy. That series had the most entertainment value, in my opinion. The Gale Force Team Freedom series, even though that went 3-2, it was kind of a tale of which team dominates this game, which team looks objectively better this game, and that didn't happen with the Tempo Storm Team Freedom series. So I think that's my series of the week. What do you got?
I really liked that first series. That was a very entertaining series, very balanced overall. I would actually say Naventic No Tomorrow.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that was Naventic coming back from being down. And this is going to tie into my player of the week for Casanova, just landing some incredible swaps. Cheeky, yes, at times. But also very effective.
It was cheeky and effective, I think is the way I would describe it. That kill on Leoric was pretty ballsy, but incredibly effective. Casanova was brilliant. I think he was a shining example on what was otherwise a choke job by No Tomorrow, if I'm going to be honest. It's weird to say Casanova is far and away the least experienced person on No Tomorrow and has far and away been playing the best on No Tomorrow, but I don't think you would disagree with that. Would you?
No, I don't. I wouldn't. Yeah. And honestly, sometimes, the people who are at maybe the bottom of the rung want to prove themselves, and I think maybe he's just showing up.
Yeah. For my player of the week, I'm going to go over to Team Freedom as well. I think I was just incredibly impressed this last week by Collusion, both because we know that he's very much a leader on Team Freedom, but just the way that he positioned himself in fights, the way he always managed to keep the team just alive enough that people were staying in the fight. They won the trades, and the reason they won the trades, I thought, was just fantastic cooldown usage by Collusion. I've always thought he's been one of the most underrated players in North America. I thought with Gusterbus / Astral Authority, when they were under that name, the best players on that team were Equinox and Collusion, in my opinion. And I've just been nothing but impressed with him. So he's going to get my player of the week just for his outstanding play this last week. I think he's a big reason why Team Freedom... he's the reason why Team Freedom has done as well as they have. Okay, so then we're going to jump over to Best Team of the Week. Keep in mind that for me, this award is kind of which team rose to the occasion to do the best relative to expectations. So therefore, I have to give it to Team Freedom. Even though they didn't win both their series, I still think they were a team that you and I, we expected they would lose different games, but we expected 1-6 this weekend. They went 5-5. They got a win off Gale Force. So Team Freedom's going to have to get my team of the week.
Yeah, same here, actually. For all of those reasons. I was not expecting them to play as well as they did, but I was very, very pleasantly surprised.
All right, so that takes us to the worst team of the week. Sound effects and a production value. I struggled with this one because I didn't want to say B-Step because they played Tempo Storm, and Tempo Storm's at number 1. At the same time, for a team that was looking for answers, for a team that we thought had promise, if I apply the same hi Stuart, my cat is trying to get up in my lap. For the same criteria that I apply to Team of the Week, if I apply it to Worst Team of the Week, I have to go B-Step just because it wasn't just that they lost, it's that they didn't look good losing. And so I saw the same problems as I did the first week, and that to me is devastating. And so they're going to have to fix those things, but right now they're my worst team of the week, unfortunately.
Yeah, they are for me as well. Just like No Tomorrow from last week, Sure, they only had one match, but they didn't really show up. No Tomorrow didn't get anything last weekend, and the same thing with B-Step. Yes, they did have to go up against Tempo Storm, but if they wanted to climb away from their 0-2 start from opening weekend, this was a big place to do it. At least even take one game away from Tempo Storm, but they couldn't do it. They just could not secure those team kills. So yeah, I would agree. I think B-Step is probably, for week 2, the worst team.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to jump into our play of the week. Now, you've already told me, so I have it queued up. What I'm going to do this time is I'm actually going to mute us and let Gilly and Dreadnought do the play call. So I'm actually going to play the video with sound, so we're going to do that, flipping it over to Gilly and Dread.
Pick up that bottom 4 to get a step closer. But that's a 3/4 shield.
That swap was so good.
Everybody getting picked off here for Tempo Storm. Team Freedom takes no prisoners.
Tempo Storm keeps getting hit by swaps, and now it is an even worse situation than you mentioned before. That's not keep wall, that's a keep, that's a half-shielded Immortal too, and that's Team Freedom on the core.
Even if they wipe here, Freedom gets a winning trade because there is so little to do on the side of Tempo Storm. Emerald Link comes out 60%. I think they're going to 8-minute game this. The Wailing Arrow gets the pop, but it doesn't matter. Team Freedom, under 9 minutes, take out Tempo Storm in the first game. What did we just watch?
All right, so that was Flag's play of the week. So 8-minute game against Tempo Storm. I think this set up Team Freedom for the weekend, because this was the first thing we as HGC North America fans saw, was just to our befuddlement, an 8-minute game where not only, I mean, do they lose an 8-minute game, they never got level 10s. Like, it was just domination, and it was set up by Dansky landing just perfect Artanis play. I mean, absolutely perfect Artanis play in that series.
Yeah, and I was completely confused by the end of that game, and I went to Twitter to try and figure out, all right, what did everyone else see? And it was just consistent. All of the pro players that I follow were just and it was just,
exactly.
That was it.
What just happened?
And that was their entire tweet. Nobody saw that coming, and so that would be the play of the week for me. It really set up Team Freedom to push on and have a really pretty good weekend.
Yeah. So my play of the week actually, I think, came from outside your radar, so this wasn't in your top 5. This was from the same series, though. Tempo Storm, Team Freedom. This was Game 4. Tempo Storm trying to put the series away 2-1. Now, the whole transaction of events, and I don't know how else to describe it, lasts like several minutes, and this was the top 2 shrines at the end of the game. Team Freedom has 3 points on their core. If they lose either shrine, they lose the game. We see Ragnaros stalling out that top right shrine while Team Freedom gets their top left, and then this happened, and I'm going to go ahead and again play this with sound, so we'll hear all the excitement.
Scouting drone, there's no way he can get this without dying. Insomnia's already delayed once. There's the APOC.
APOC?
He got it!
Him.
They got the blade! That's a 2-man void, but there's no follow-up.
Okay, here we go. Sophia Smash did go down. 7-sided strike as well.
Diablo's
Here comes
in.
the turn. Diablo's back in the fight. Gotham is low. Hellgate! Zogrub jumps in with Hellgate. Throws over. The stun! He's gonna take out some!
Now we see Fury's on the retreat. He does have his indestructible. That's a big 3-man condemn the channel from Insomnia. The delay, the flight. He is going to be getting the kill, but that's a 5-man Twilight Dream. 2 for 1. Tempo Storm has the lead. Everybody's health bars for Freedom are low, but Kotha gets flipped, and he is going to be one dead bird. Fury is left. He will have the shield, but I don't think it's going to matter because June moved to mid and tap. Team Freedom somehow, some way, might be able to turn this game as June is the last man standing. What?
How?
What?
Yeah, so that was just a series of events where, you know, Gillyweed and Dreadnought just could not keep up. Just all the ultimates were used extremely well. You know, you land a 5-man Twilight Dream and lose the fight. It was, what a series of events. It was from the same series, but keep in mind, I only showed the end of that, you know, transaction. Again, you have the Ragnaros, You have Zeratul dying to get the top right fort, so Ragnaros can go in and Molten Core to stall out the shrine long enough for Diablo to res and get back up in there. While this is happening, they stall out long enough for Zeratul to get back. You have the 5v5 team fight in the confines. The APOC barely stops the game-winning channel in time. The amount of things that happened there was crazy, and for Team Freedom to win that, four kills to none, was just fantastic play by them all around. And I think it really set up kind of what they can do going forward. So, with that, that's the end of our superlatives. We're going to jump back to my little slideshow that I have, and going to now look ahead to next week's game. So, starting with Friday, so this is tomorrow night, we're going to see, and actually, the control didn't register, so it's registering my slides. Once again, NA production value. Here we go. So, jumping in to Friday games, first we have the battle at the bottom between No Tomorrow and B-Step. Both teams at 0-3. The pillow fight of the week, if we want to call it that. Both of us think B-Step's going to get it back here, but neither of us are predicting a 3-0, which I don't know if that speaks to maybe we're seeing No Tomorrow kind of get it together even though they lost in Naventic, or we're just not at all confident in B-Step's ability to play consistently. What are your thoughts there?
Probably just a little bit of both. As kind of a disclaimer for all of my predictions, I got none of the predictions from week 2 correct.
Yeah.
Some of them were kind of close, but I do think that B-Step, with being in such a bad position with some really fantastic and veteran players, will be able to pull this off. I don't know. I don't really have a good reason why it'll go all the way to 5. But I guess we have seen 5 game series as the opening match every weekend so far. So I don't know.
That's as good a reason as any. Then jumping into the nightcap there, Superstars Gale Force. So both these teams are in that 2-1 tier. Gale Force, I think, clearly wants to get back on track. They want to prove that they're not the team that lost to Team Freedom. This is where it starts. You're looking at them playing Superstars, who, by most people's account, is kind of a middle-of-the-pack North America team right now. They've shown signs of greatness. They've also shown a Cho'Gall, so I guess it's a wash. But both teams kind of known for weird drafting, sometimes bad drafting, I think is how it can be worded. So I fully expect to see a Butcher in this series. I don't expect that. Gazlo, maybe. I could see a Wombo combo Gazlo comp.
Yeah, I mean, given both teams, I don't think we'll see another Lost Vikings, but there's going to be something crazy. There's going to be something out there outside of the traditional North American meta. But I do think that Gale Force will be able to pull it together from a weird second weekend, and I think they'll be able to take it.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think you have Gale Force at 3-0. I have them at 3-1. I could see a 3-0 happening if Superstars wants to get into that top echelon. They need to win this series because they've already lost the Team 8. And again, I kind of talk about this 5-2 plateau. You have to, if you're Superstars, beat either Gale Force or Tempo Storm. But also with Gale Force now, they have to start thinking about that 5-2 plateau, where if they lose this series, now they have to beat Team 8, they have to beat Tempo Storm next week. They have to not trip up again. So I think this is big for both teams because the loser here is going to have trouble getting into that Western Clash. But I do think Gale Force, just on firepower and player personnel, is the better team. Jumping into our Saturday games, we're oops. Oh dear. I didn't just hit refresh again. Lies. Jumping into our Saturday games, so here we go. Team Freedom versus Naventic. So this is a team on the way up with a team on the way down. And Naventic looking to reverse both of those trends on Saturday. This is a chance for them. This is, at least on paper, this is an easier game, you would think, than Tempo Storm and Gale Force. But then again, Team Freedom beat Gale Force, so maybe not. We actually disagree here, but not by much. So we're both looking at a 5-game series. You think Team Freedom's going to pull out. I think Naventic's going to pull it out. Let me sell you on why I think Naventic's going to pull it out. I think Naventic is getting there. I think ultimately, when it comes down to it, at least in a 5-game series, at least 2 games are decided by who wins the last team fight of the game, if not more. When it comes down to that, while I've been impressed with Team Freedom's play, if Naventic can get to the late game in a clean situation where they get to dictate things, I have no doubt that they will win the last team fight. The question is, do they lose so much macro game early that they get there? And I think they'll get there enough to that late game where they get to kind of pick a fight they want rather than trying to force one just to force one. I think they can get into that position enough to win this series.
I think it's going to be close, and it'll definitely come down to a big team fight at the end. We've seen that for Naventic, especially when they went up against Tempo Storm. But I do think with how well Team Freedom played against both Tempo Storm and then beating Gale Force, I think that this is a team that's really starting to shape up, and this is going to be a really good test for them. So if anything, I think that Team Freedom might take the first 2 games, and then Naventic, in Naventic fashion, for HGC, will take the game 3 and 4, and then it'll probably just come down to a very close game 5, unless Team Freedom pulls out what they did with the Gale Force, and they're able to win early and just keep up that pressure.
That is a true point. Naventic hasn't just lost. They've lost bad in game 1 and 2 in all 3 series. And even though they didn't beat Gale Force in game 3, they almost brought it back, and they did bring it back in the other 2 series. So maybe if they can just wake up a little bit earlier tomorrow, they'll synchronize when they're going to play shitty to right before the series starts, and they can just get that out of the way and play well. But I think we all have to talk about the nightcap. Tempo Storm Team 8. And I am really surprised we agree here, because I was thinking 3-1 Team 8 would seem like really just kind of hyper-aggressive call of, I think Tempo Storm's just going to come out and look bad. But we agree. Yeah. Team 8, by not a 3-2 margin, but a 3-1. I think it just comes down to Team 8 has played more consistent, in my case. Is that the same for you?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And this is a huge hurdle for them. But I think that the way that team has come together in such a short period of time, I think that they're just going to keep up that momentum. And we have seen some weird things coming out of Tempo Storm lately. So I think probably the combination of those 2 factors is why I had Team 8 winning 3-1.
Yeah, I'm the matchup I'm most looking forward to seeing: Fury versus Justing. Hi, this is a cat that is being annoying right now. Justing has really impressed me. He was a guy who has always been in the hot scene. He was on Team Name Change for a long time, and I always had high opinions of him, but because Team Name Change overall never really got to that second level in LAN events, he never, I think, got the credit he deserved. I think he has played as one of the 2 best tanks in North America, and obviously Fury, I think, has played as the best. I think Fury has made up for a lot of Tempo Storm's bad play with his own just stellar play. His ETC play has been the best in North America, even counting King Caffeine with the 5-man mosh. Overall, I've just been more impressed game to game with Fury. So I'm really looking forward to that matchup. Which tank is going to put their team in better positions to team fights? Keep in mind, though, that I also take Glaurung over any assassin on Tempo Storm's team right now. I think he's just playing out of his mind. I really do.
Yeah.
And Prismat's been playing out of his mind as well. Mm-hmm. So, going to be an interesting one. That takes us to Sunday. Sunday. You will pay for the full seat. You only need the edge. As Gale Force takes on Team 8. So no rest for the weary. Team 8 gonna have to go right back to the grindstone. This is the third week in a row a team has had to play both Tempo Storm and Gale Force in the same weekend. Naventic did it week 1. Team Freedom did it. Now the question is, after the first week, Naventic went 0-2 against Gale Force Tempo Storm. Team Freedom managed to beat one of them. You have Team 8 giving us the continued sliding scale of Team 8 going 2-0. I will admit to being a Gale Force fan, and this is incredibly biasing my opinion here, and I won't pretend it isn't. I do think Gale Force, given that they'll have another day to prepare for this game, I think that is a factor. Given that I think they will come in with a renewed focus. You know, you see this in other sports when a team loses a game they shouldn't. You know, it's kind of the same thing I talked about. I guess I haven't talked about, but, you know, I mentioned it a little bit where, you know, West Virginia beats Baylor, the number 1 team in the country, and the next week they lose to Kansas State, who's not a good team. Mm-hmm. And we saw that, I think, with Gale Force. They had that hugely emotional game against Naventic, and I think the rest of that week they maybe didn't practice seriously, and I think that loss will motivate them to realize, like, look, we already had a big weekend. We already had to play Team 8, who's up in the top. We have to play a good team in Superstars, but we really need to win both these games to assert, like, look, we're Gale Force. We're the NA's best team. And I think they're going to come in with that focus. I still think they'll probably lose 1 or 2 games just on draft alone.
Sure.
But I think when you look at what all 5 players bring to the table on Gale Force, I'm still a little bit concerned with Team 8 that if Glaurung and Prismat can kind of be bullied a little bit in the early game, that they might not play as well. So that's my opinion. But 2 huge games this weekend, both involving Team 8. Yeah. That takes us to B-Step Team Freedom. So we've already talked about how Team Freedom's going to play Naventic, and that's their chance to, you know, notch another win against one of the NA big dogs, as it were. B-Step, previously we thought they were. B-Step was either going to come into this game 0-4, or they're going to come in 1-3. And despite the fact that B-Step has had the toughest schedule, which is why they're as low as they are, we still don't see them turning it around here. You're a bit higher on Team Freedom than I am, I think, right now. Mm-hmm. I just think B-Step doesn't have the synergy. I don't think replacing Glaurung with McIntyre has worked out for them at all. And I unfortunately see that trend continuing. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that if they can get their team to click and get them to work together, everyone to work together, sure. But I think that Team Freedom is doing that much better. They're putting their team together a lot better than B-Step. So I think it should still be a really good matchup. But as of right now, coming off of this last weekend, that's kind of what I'm basing it on.
Yeah, I tend to agree. So with that, I guess our predictions for the week, you have Team 8 leaving next week 5-0, and unequivocally the top-rated team in North America. I mean, at that point, they're almost, I don't know if they would be mathematically guaranteed to make the Western Clash, but I have to imagine, if not, it would take some obscure scenario for them to not get there. I have Team 8 leaving 4-1, and Gale Force leaving 4-1, and Tempo Storm leaving 4-1. Which would set up, in either case, a big matchup next week in Game 4. So that's Tempo Storm Gale Force. But we'll talk about that next time. So with that, Flag, thanks for, sticking it out with my bad camera play tonight. But I want to thank you again for hanging out with me.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for everybody watching. It was a lot of fun talking about HGC.
Yep, and we'll look forward to it, and we'll tell you why we got everything wrong next time on 323 Weekly. Thank you again for watching.